I keep hearing a lot of talk from TV preachers, as well as people in general from my neck of the woods in the Bible Belt, about the coming tribulation and about something called the mark of the beast on our forehead and on our hand, and how if we get that mark, it will mean we belong to the Antichrist. There seems to be a lot of confusion about what that mark is. Some say it's an implanted magnetic chip or a scan code. Some say that true believers will be gone before that ever happens. Well, unlike the TV preachers, I don't really know exactly what it all means, but being the skeptic that I am, I seriously doubt that most of them have it figured out either. However, being a student of Scripture, I have read the last book of the Bible, known as the Revelation. Admittedly, it does seem to be a rather difficult letter to understand because of the symbolic language and because it is written from an Eastern mindset, which is a very different mindset than how we Westerners think. And I'm probably about as Western mindset as well as Southern as it gets. But realizing that the Easterners used word pictures to describe things does help me to better understand it. And I've discovered that if you take the Bible as a whole, as one story, so to speak, rather than breaking it up into two sections and then lots of different books, it becomes easier to understand because much of it tends to interpret itself. Actually, a large portion of the Bible seems to revolve around the retelling in various forms of the story of how God delivered the Israelites from their Egyptian bondage of slavery. The story of the Passover in the book of Exodus marks the beginning of that deliverance, and the ritual observances became part of God's laws for them. In Exodus, for example, he tells them, quote, "The observation of Passover will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that the law of the land is to be on your lips," unquote. Well, that sounded vaguely familiar to something else that I'd read in the Revelation letter, so I continued reading. Further on in Exodus, around chapter 13, it talks about telling your children why you observe the Passover. Quoting again, "And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand," end quote. Well, there it is again, the hand and the forehead. So what exactly could that mean? Well, continuing reading in the Old Testament, I came to the book of Deuteronomy. Here Moses is retelling again to all of Israel the commandments God has given them. And in chapter 6, he says, quote, "These commandments are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your door frames and on your gates," unquote. So here, having it on their heart is added as well as on their hands and forehead. It would seem to me the meaning here is to do these things so as to teach their children and to constantly remind them about what God has done for them. Could it be that the symbols on their forehead would remind them to keep their minds focused on God? And could it be the symbols on their hand would remind them as they're going about their daily work? And could it be that those constant reminders would impress it upon their hearts? I think that sounds reasonable. Well, if that were the case, would it be a stretch for the Eastern mind to read about an evil force that would try to turn their focus of mind and activity to worship a different God? Say some worldview so intent on making wrong seem right and right seem wrong that eventually it could become so hostile to the things of God that it would become almost impossible to conduct business and to live according to God's laws. Sound far-fetched? Well, maybe. But just maybe we should take a serious, long, and hard look at our current events and the world around us. Maybe in our modern world, we aren't asked to actually tie things to our head and hands, but to learn truth and to think on these things as we go about our daily work. Maybe we wouldn't be losing our children in record numbers to the world's mindset if we did more tying on of symbols on our hands and foreheads, so to speak, to implant God's laws in our minds and hearts, reminding us and our children of what God has done instead of running around looking for someone who wants to implant a magnetic dot in our forehead. I'm Darrell Nelson, and that's the Stone Cold Truth.